In this video, we will look at the military strategies the Jagga-Galla used to invade and subjugate so many people and colonize Africa before the Europeans arrived. The Jaga-Galla Zanj were a highly militarized group whose practices had been perfected over centuries going back as far as the time of Abraham. Abraham is most likely the title of a chieftain figure out of South Asia. We're still verifying this. Every invasion began with rituals and sacrifices, much like the Phoenicians. We're still looking into this connection too. It started at daybreak when the Jaga, which is correctly Jago, a Shilluk word for chief, would sit on a stool without a back in his tent, surrounded by 50 women who were forced to sing while waving tails of different animals. The Mokisso, who was the spiritual chief advisor, would begin throwing some flesh into a fire hearth set in the middle of the tent. Once he was out of the flesh, an earthen pot was brought into the tent and placed over the fire. The Mokisso would then stick his hand into the pot and scoop a white paint-like substance that he would use to anoint the Jago, smearing his forehead, temples, chest, and belly. The Mokisso would take the Jaga's hatchet, his primary weapon of war, and murmur some incantations before handing it to the Jaga and assuring him of a victory because he, the Mokisso, was with him. Then a young boy would be brought into the tent. He would be held and slayed by the Jaga using his hatchet. The sacrifices had begun. Then 4 men would be brought forth. 2 would be slayed by the Jaga using his hatchet, and the other 2 would be slayed outside the camp. None of these people volunteered. This was the Jagga-Galla Zanj practice of human sacrifice, and it was pervasive in the Congo, where they held fort, and is still pervasive across many cultures which were once Jaga columns across Africa today. When we hear of human sacrifice, it's not always a rumor, as in the case of people with albinism who were targeted in Tanzania because of the same. The Abrahamic belief of sacrificing anything, people, animals, for good fortune is why people ran to the Proto-Bantu for refuge, which most likely led to the downfall of the Proto-Bantu. Once the human sacrifices were complete, the Jaga would give the order to have 10 cows, goats, and dogs sacrificed, 5 within and 5 without the camp. The blood would be collected and sprinkled on the fires, and the flesh was eaten with enthusiasm. The Galombo, who was the head general and second to the Jaga, would send orders to all junior officers to perform the same sacrifices. Once these had been completed, they were ready to destroy. The Jaga often came by sea and then used the river to navigate inland, which is why the people who were first and most affected were those districts that were located close to water. This included Zanzibar, the entire East African coast, ancient Somalia, and the Mwanga, who were along the Zambezi at Sene and Tete. All of these populations would fall and leave only the stone ruins as an ancient trace of the ancient Proto-Bantu stone builder population who once inhabited the regions. The Jaga were a highly organized militarized group who divided their ranks into columns. Even women were part of their ranks. This was where Nzinga comes from, and before her there was Temba Ndumba. There were a total of 7 columns which served different functions, and the Lunda people get their name from one such column, which was charged with safeguarding the looted property of the Jaga, the chief. And the head of this column was called Ilunda, who was one of the Jaga's relations. The primary military column had an advance or pawn column that was often filled with young people and the newly abducted, who were trained and expected to be fearless. Therefore, any sign of cowardice meant immediate death, and the body was given away to be consumed by other members of the group. So cannibalism was used as a tool of control, both the eaters and the people who would get eaten. In addition, the Kalumbo, who was the head general, would give them motivational speeches every night. The Jaga understood the power of psychology and practiced it. It's untrue that Africans don't know much. Maybe some, but not all, are ignorant. Everything was deliberate and calculated. The advanced columns were given offensive weapons, which included bows, arrows, spears, darts, daggers, and clubs, which were often looted weapons. But since the advanced columns served as pawns, they were trained to first use their defensive weapons so that they would tire out their opponent. These advanced columns would be used to spend their opponent's weapons. They were instructed to cover their bodies, which were deliberately naked, with a thick shield made from thick hides, then sent to fight naked to desensitize them from flinching from pain, and also reinforce that they were discardable, not worth saving unless they saved themselves. This psychology is why many societies have corrupt and selfish people who only think about saving themselves. The column was also instructed to quietly entrench themselves and carry out frequent skirmishes until the other side had been worn thin. This is something a lot of communities still do today to others. They might not use traditional weapons of war, but they do entrench themselves and wear the other side thin so they can gain political power, and so on. Then the commanding officer would send a large detachment in the night to lie in wait until daybreak, when the Jaga would stage a surprise attack on the unsuspecting and now weakened district. They would lay waste, mercilessly ravaging and plundering. They would unalive all the older people, which is the reason Bulawayo and Jibigogo exist. These were Muziligazi and Shaga's capitals, both which mean places of great slaughter. But it is important to note that these were first Shaga's capitals. Muziligazi died in 1838. The person afterwards was a British creation and plant. We will go over this in another video. But both Shaga and Muziligazi were Jaga, and Shaga is actually a corruption of the word Jaga, and it might have not been his real name. In the aftermath, all infants and children who couldn't fend for themselves, the older men and women, most of the military-aged, and anyone who proved hard to control was slaughtered. Others were taken to become porters or to be fattened and used as sacrifices for further invasions. The children between 7 and about 15 were folded into the ranks to be trained and taught the ways of the Jaga. At this age, they were independent but controllable. There are cultures in Africa who still do this. They unalive older people, accusing them of witchcraft, and raid villages to abduct children for their wars. These are Jaga descendants. If the raid was successful, a column led by an officer called the Mani Kurio would arrive and take stock of all the valuable possessions which now belonged to the Jaga. This is one reason why there are barely any scripts or relics left across Africa. They were plundered or burned. This unit would also serve as the porter unit who carried the food and valuables for all the Jaga columns. This is why they needed so many people and were originally called Zanji, which likely means plenty of people. They went from Zanji to Gala to Jaga. There were some breakaway or adjacent columns in between, such as the Luba, the Lunda, the Chewa, the Yawo, the Visa, the Ngolo, Nzinga's people, the Khoi, and the founders of the Nguni, who were all created by invasions on the original inhabitants. I hope you found this video useful and it helps fill some gaps in African history. Thank you so much to all who continue to support this channel. If you would like to show your support, please give to a coffee. The link is in the description box below. And thank you for watching.